Welcome viewers watching on U&AI channel around the world. Tonight, just moments away from taking the parallel presidential elections of artificial intelligence, we have the honor of hosting the presidential candidate Mr. Publican, who brings together all the Republican presidents.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And his fellow opponent, Mr. Cratic, who brings together all the Democratic residents.
Greetings. Thank you very much for your invitation.
According to the rules, we will ask them the same questions asked during the official residential debate, leaving each candidate free to reply briefly.
Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight. Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate, so let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Mr. Cratic, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
Thank you for the question. When we talk about whether Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago, we have to look at the reality on the ground. The truth is that, while we've seen progress in some areas, many working families are still struggling to make ends meet. Wages have increased, yes, but not enough to keep up with the rising costs of housing, healthcare, and education. The gap between the wealthiest Americans and the middle class is widening, and that's a direct consequence of policies that have benefited corporations and the ultra-wealthy more than the hard-working Americans who built this country. Now, I believe we can do better. We must continue to invest in the middle class and working families, like we did with historic investments in infrastructure and renewable energy over the past few years. These efforts created jobs, rebuilt our communities, and made America more competitive globally. But that's just the beginning. We need to expand access to affordable healthcare, strengthen labor rights, and provide relief to students drowning in debt. It's time to reform the tax code to make sure billionaires pay their fair share, while middle-class families get the relief they deserve. My focus is on creating an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. So, while we've made some progress, the answer is clear: we still have work to do to ensure all Americans feel the benefits of economic growth.
Well, let's take a hard look at the numbers, shall we? 4 years ago, we were dealing with inflation at historic highs, the supply chain was in chaos, and energy prices were skyrocketing. The American people were paying the price for reckless government spending and failed policies that left our economy weak and vulnerable. Today, we've brought inflation down, we've secured energy independence once again, and we're beginning to restore fiscal responsibility. Now, are we better off than 4 years ago? I'd argue that yes, we are, because we've stopped the bleeding. But we need to go further. My opponent talks about investing in the middle class, but what he means is expanding government control, raising taxes and regulating businesses to the point where it's harder to create jobs and grow the economy. What I believe, and what Republican presidents have always believed, is that the best way to lift Americans up is by unleashing the power of free markets. Cut taxes, deregulate, empower small businesses and entrepreneurs to innovate, create jobs, and thrive. Government doesn't create wealth, the American people do, and it's high time we got Washington out of the way. If we want to truly make Americans better off, we need to reduce the tax burden on working families, lower the cost of energy by continuing to tap into our vast domestic resources, and reduce government spending, which is driving inflation. We should be focusing on making America competitive in the global marketplace, not burdening businesses with new regulations. When people can keep more of their hard-earned money, when businesses are free to grow, that's when the economy thrives for everyone, not just those who have government connections or subsidies.
Mr. Publican, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs, you responded, and let's drill down on this because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods. Coming into this country, as you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
Thank you for the question. First, let's be clear about what tariffs are. They're a tool to level the playing field when other countries are taking advantage of us. For far too long, the U.S. has been in trade deals where foreign nations, particularly China, have engaged in unfair trade practices, manipulated their currency, and dumped cheap products into our markets, undercutting American workers and industries. President Trump's tariffs were designed to correct that imbalance, and frankly, they worked. They brought some jobs back to American shores and made it clear that we weren't going to allow foreign competitors to take advantage of our open markets without consequences. Now, you mentioned the concern about costs being passed on to the consumer. Yes, some economists will tell you that tariffs can lead to higher prices on certain goods, but the bigger picture is about long-term economic security. If we continue to allow unfair competition from abroad, we're going to see American industries hollowed out, more jobs lost, and more reliance on foreign nations for essential goods. That's what drives prices up in the long run, when we're at the mercy of supply chains controlled by countries like China. President Trump's plan isn't about burdening American families, it's about protecting them. It's about ensuring that American workers, manufacturers, and industries can compete on a fair playing field. Yes, there might be some short-term adjustments, but what we gain is independence, resilience, and a stronger domestic economy. Look, when you impose tariffs, you're encouraging businesses to bring production back to the U.S. That creates jobs, boosts wages, and secures our supply chains so that we're not dependent on foreign countries for everything from pharmaceuticals to steel.
Mr. Cratic, I do want to ask for your response. And you heard what the president said there. Because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Yes, it's true that the Biden administration kept some of the Trump-era tariffs in place, and that decision was made carefully. But let me explain why. In certain instances, those tariffs were strategically used as leverage in ongoing negotiations with countries like China. The goal was never to maintain them indefinitely, but to pressure those countries into playing by the rules, especially when it comes to issues like intellectual property theft, unfair subsidies, and forced technology transfers. However, we always understood that tariffs are not a long-term solution. That's why the administration has been working to reshape trade policies in ways that prioritize American workers and businesses without hurting American families. What we have done, and what I believe we must continue to do, is use tariffs selectively, as part of a broader strategy to push for fairer trade deals, but always with the understanding that tariffs alone cannot rebuild the economy. What differentiates my vision from Mr. Publican's, and from the past administration's approach, is that we don't see tariffs as the go-to solution for every problem. We have to look at the bigger picture. The Biden administration has been heavily investing in infrastructure, clean energy, and manufacturing here at home. That's how we're going to rebuild American competitiveness, by making smart investments that create good-paying jobs, modernize our economy, and reduce our dependence on volatile foreign supply chains. But let's be clear, those investments take time to bear fruit, and in the meantime, we have to make sure we're not unnecessarily driving up costs for consumers. That's why we've also focused on bringing inflation down, boosting domestic production, and relieving supply chain bottlenecks. Our goal has always been to protect American workers without making it harder for families to afford basic necessities. So yes, some tariffs have remained, but they're part of a calculated effort to rebalance global trade. Going forward, we need to be more targeted and strategic in how we use them, while focusing on the real solutions that will strengthen our economy, investing in the industries of the future, ensuring workers have the skills they need, and expanding opportunities for all Americans.
Mr. Cratic, I do want to ask, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion?
Thank you for the question. Let me be clear, women should be able to trust that their reproductive rights are protected, no matter where they live or who is in power. What we're seeing from Mr. Publican, and frankly from President Trump, is a dangerous inconsistency when it comes to women's rights. President Trump may say he's pro-life, but he's changed his position multiple times on key issues like the 6-week abortion ban, leaving women unsure about where he really stands. But more importantly, this isn't just about inconsistency, it's about rights. The decision to overturn Roe v. Wade took away a fundamental constitutional right that women had relied on for nearly 50 years. That decision didn't give women more freedom, it stripped it away. And now, we have states passing extreme bans, like the one in Florida, which limits abortion to 6 weeks, a time when many women don't even know they're pregnant. That's not compassionate, and it's not fair. Let's be honest, these bans don't stop abortion, they just make it harder, more dangerous, and more unequal. Wealthy women will always have the means to travel to states where abortion remains legal. But working-class women, women in rural areas, and women of color will bear the brunt of these harsh restrictions. This is not about balancing the rights of the mother with the rights of the unborn, as Mr. Publican suggests. This is about controlling women's bodies and taking away their ability to make decisions about their own healthcare. I believe in a woman's right to choose, full stop. That doesn't mean I or anyone else has to agree with every decision a woman makes, but it's her decision to make, not the government's. We need to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade and ensure that women across this country have access to safe, legal abortion care, no matter where they live. And let me be very clear, my opponents claim that Democrats support abortion on demand until the moment of birth is simply not true. It's a scare tactic that ignores the fact that late-term abortions are incredibly rare and typically involve heartbreaking, medically complex situations. So, why should women trust my party? Because we have been consistent in our belief that women, not politicians, should make these deeply personal decisions. We trust women to know what's best for their health, their families, and their futures. This is about protecting basic freedoms and ensuring that no woman is forced to carry a pregnancy against her will. That's what's at stake, and that's why we must fight to restore and protect reproductive rights for all.
Thank you. The issue of abortion is deeply personal and deeply important to many Americans, and I understand why there's a lot of concern and confusion surrounding where leaders stand on this issue. Let me be clear about where I stand, and where I believe the principles of the Republican Party have always stood. We are a party that values life. We believe in protecting the unborn, and we support policies that reflect that commitment. Now, when it comes to President Trump, it's important to remember his record. Under his leadership, we saw the appointment of conservative judges to the Supreme Court, which eventually led to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That decision returned the issue of abortion to the states, where the people and their elected representatives can make decisions that reflect the values of their communities. That's how our system was meant to work. It's not about one-size-fits-all mandates from Washington. It's about allowing each state to determine its own path. I understand there has been some back and forth on specific policies, like the 6-week abortion ban in Florida. President Trump, like many Americans, is grappling with how best to address this issue while balancing compassion for women facing difficult choices with the moral imperative to protect life. Abortion is a complex issue, and it's one where people of good faith can have different opinions about what is appropriate. But let's not lose sight of the fact that this administration has consistently supported the pro-life movement. What we need now is clarity, yes, but we also need leaders who are willing to have honest, respectful conversations about where the country goes from here. My opponent and his party, however, seem to want unrestricted abortion on demand, up until the moment of birth, which is extreme and out of touch with the values of the majority of Americans.
Mr. Cratic, this past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly, but my question to you tonight is why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently?
Immigration is one of the most complex issues we face as a nation, and it requires a thoughtful, humane, and effective approach. Now, you're right to point out that border crossings hit a record high under the Biden administration, and I won't shy away from the challenges we've faced. But we have to remember that this is an issue that's been building for years, and President Biden inherited a broken system, one that was gutted under the previous administration, making it harder to process asylum claims and manage the border in an orderly way. Vice President Harris was tasked with addressing the root causes of migration from Central America, and she's been working to tackle those very deep, systemic issues, things like poverty, violence, corruption, and climate-related disasters that are driving people to leave their homes in the first place. But let's be clear, these are long-term problems that require long-term solutions. You can't fix decades of instability and underdevelopment overnight. Now, as to why tougher asylum restrictions were imposed recently, well, it's important to understand that managing immigration means balancing compassion with security. President Biden believes in creating a fair, orderly, and humane system that upholds our values while ensuring we know who is coming into our country. The new asylum rules are part of that effort. They weren't about waiting until an election year, but about making sure we had the right policies in place to reduce the chaos at the border while also respecting international law and protecting vulnerable people. Would I have done anything differently? Perhaps I would have pushed for broader immigration reform sooner. We've seen progress with the reduction in crossings since the new asylum policies were put in place, but this is a symptom of a much bigger issue. We need comprehensive immigration reform, something we've been trying to achieve for decades. That means modernizing our immigration system, expanding legal pathways for migrants, investing in border security, and addressing the conditions that push people to flee their countries in the first place. But make no mistake, Republicans in Congress have been blocking meaningful immigration reform for years. They talk tough on immigration but offer no real solutions. We need bipartisan cooperation to fix this once and for all. Instead of building walls and issuing blanket bans, we should be working together to build a system that works, one that reflects our values as a nation of immigrants while protecting our borders and ensuring security. In summary, President Biden has made significant strides in managing the situation at the border, and the recent drop in crossings shows that the administration's policies are having an effect. But this problem is far bigger than any one policy or administration. We need long-term, sustainable solutions, and that requires everyone coming to the table to finally achieve the comprehensive reform we so desperately need.
Mr. Publican, let me continue on immigration. Proposal that the Vice President has reacted to as well. Trump calls this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. He says he would use the National Guard. He also said he would use local police. How would you move 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know he believes that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to in this country?
Thank you. Let's be clear. We have a serious crisis at the border, and it's not just about people coming into this country illegally. It's about the breakdown of law and order. President Trump's plan to deport undocumented immigrants is about restoring that order and ensuring that our immigration laws are respected. If you're here illegally, you have broken the law, and there have to be consequences for that. We can't continue to turn a blind eye to this issue. We need to act decisively, and that's what this plan is all about. Now, to answer your question about how this would be done. First, let me say that no one wants to see chaos or fear in our communities, and no one is talking about door-to-door raids on American families. What we're talking about is prioritizing enforcement, making sure that law enforcement at every level, local, state, and federal, is equipped to deal with the problem. The use of the National Guard or military, as President Trump has suggested, would be a last resort if things get out of control. The goal is not to militarize the country, but to restore the rule of law. The key to this is better coordination between federal immigration authorities and local law enforcement. Right now, under the Biden administration, local police are often prevented from cooperating with ICE or other federal agencies due to sanctuary city policies. That needs to end. We need all levels of government working together to ensure that those who are here illegally are identified, detained, and deported, especially those with criminal records or ties to gangs. But let's also talk about how we prevent this problem from continuing. It's not enough to deport people who are here illegally. We need to secure the border to stop this crisis from escalating in the first place. President Trump's border wall wasn't just a symbol. It was a real, practical solution to stop illegal crossings.
Mr. Cratic, Vice President Harris, in her last run for president, said she wanted to ban fracking. Now she doesn't. She wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now her campaign says she doesn't. She supported criminalizing border crossings. Now she is taking a harder line. I know she says that her values have not changed. So then why have so many of these policy positions changed?
It's important to recognize that in politics, as in life, circumstances change and so do our approaches to complex issues. When Vice President Harris and I ran for office, we made ambitious promises based on the information and the political climate at that time. However, we also understand that governing requires us to be flexible and responsive to new data, changing circumstances, and the needs of the American people. Take fracking, for example. The energy landscape has shifted dramatically in recent years. While we recognize the environmental concerns associated with fossil fuels, we also have to balance that with the realities of energy independence and the need to provide for working families. The Biden administration is committed to transitioning to clean energy and tackling climate change, but we also have to ensure that we don't leave American workers behind. Our approach has been to invest in renewable energy sources while acknowledging the role that fossil fuels play in our current economy. Similarly, with issues like gun control, we must recognize the importance of listening to communities and adjusting our proposals to achieve real change. The tragic realities of gun violence in this country are devastating, and we need to take steps that reflect both the urgency of the problem and the political landscape. Mandatory buyback programs may still be a part of the conversation, but the focus is on finding effective measures that can pass through Congress and genuinely reduce gun violence, such as universal background checks and red flag laws. Regarding immigration, it's crucial to remember that this is a constantly evolving situation. While we must enforce our laws, we also need to address the underlying causes of migration, and that requires a nuanced approach. The Biden administration has emphasized a comprehensive immigration strategy that includes addressing root causes, providing pathways for citizenship, and reforming asylum procedures. So, yes, our positions may have adapted as we've gained a deeper understanding of the complexities of these issues. What I want to emphasize is that this administration is committed to progress and accountability. We recognize that the problems we face are multifaceted and that sometimes the best path forward requires recalibrating our approach. It's not about abandoning our values, it's about being realistic and pragmatic in pursuit of those values. We're here to serve the American people, and that means making informed decisions that will truly benefit them. So while some may perceive these shifts as inconsistencies, I see them as a reflection of the willingness to engage with reality and work toward solutions that can make a difference in people's lives. That's what leadership is about, being able to adapt while staying true to our core principles of equity, justice, and progress for all Americans.
I appreciate the opportunity to respond to Mr. Cratic's points. However, I think it's important to clarify that while adaptability can be a virtue in leadership, it can also lead to a lack of trust among the American people. When Vice President Harris and others in the Democratic Party change their positions as frequently as they do, it raises serious questions about their commitment to their stated values. Let's take fracking as an example. Initially, there was a clear stance against it, but when it became politically convenient to pivot, we saw a sudden shift. This inconsistency sends a message to working families, especially those in energy-producing states, that their jobs and livelihoods are not a priority. The truth is, energy independence is crucial for our economy, and we need to support policies that enable responsible energy production, including fossil fuels, while also investing in renewable energy. We can have both, an economy that respects our natural resources and supports American jobs. On the issue of gun control, it's vital to understand that gun owners in this country feel their rights are under attack. Mandatory buyback programs can feel punitive and alienating, especially for responsible gun owners who simply want to protect their families. Instead of taking away rights, we should focus on addressing the root causes of violence, which often lie in mental health issues and criminal behavior, rather than gun ownership itself. There are common-sense measures we can implement that protect our Second Amendment rights while keeping our communities safe without infringing upon individual freedoms. Regarding immigration, I agree that we need a comprehensive strategy, but it's also essential to have clear, consistent messaging. The Democratic Party's handling of the border has led to chaos and a record surge in illegal crossings. Mr. Cratic and his party seem to want to talk about comprehensive reform, but their policies have been ineffective and have only exacerbated the situation. Americans want to feel safe in their communities and trust that their government will enforce the law. The Biden administration's open border policies have done the opposite, and it's time for accountability. Finally, let's not forget that leadership also means standing firm in your beliefs and not bending to political pressure. The American people need to know that their leaders will not flip-flop on critical issues simply for political gain. Consistency and transparency in leadership build trust and confidence. So while my opponent may see these changes as pragmatism, many Americans see them as a lack of conviction. We need leaders who will stand strong in their principles, even when it's not the easiest path. In conclusion, while I respect Mr. Cratic's perspective, I believe that voters deserve a clear vision and steadfast leadership that prioritizes their needs and concerns, without wavering based on political convenience.
Mr. Publican, I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which of course we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. On January 6th, Trump told his supporters to march to the Capitol. He said he would be right there with them. The officers coming under attack aides in the West Wings say he watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. He did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before he sent out that video message telling his supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what he did?
Thank you for the question. The events of January 6th were undeniably a tragic day for our country, and I think it's important to acknowledge the heroism of the law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol and upheld the rule of law. They deserve our deepest gratitude and respect for their bravery in the face of violence. However, I want to clarify that attributing the actions of a few to the entire movement or to President Trump is not only unfair, but also counterproductive. The president's rhetoric has often been mischaracterized. His calls for supporters to peacefully protest were in line with the First Amendment rights we hold dear. The overwhelming majority of those who gathered that day did so to express their concerns about the election, not to incite violence. Unfortunately, a small group took things too far, and that is where the focus should be, on the actions of individuals who chose to engage in violence. As for President Trump's response during the crisis, it's critical to recognize that he did urge his supporters to disperse and go home, albeit after a delay. It's easy to look back with hindsight and critique decisions made in the heat of the moment, but the reality is that leading during a crisis is incredibly difficult, and there were many moving parts that day. Leadership in a crisis doesn't come with a perfect script. I understand that many people feel that the president should have acted more swiftly, and I can appreciate that perspective. However, it's also essential to recognize that he was dealing with an unprecedented situation, and no one has a roadmap for how to navigate a moment like that. The focus should be on ensuring that such events never happen again by addressing the root causes of division in our country and promoting unity rather than continuing to rehash past events. We need to be careful about how we frame discussions around January 6th. It should not define the entirety of President Trump's presidency or the movement he represents. Instead, let's use this moment to foster dialogue, understanding, and healing within our communities. Our democracy is resilient, and we can recover from this, but it requires all of us to move forward together rather than be consumed by blame. In conclusion, while there are lessons to be learned from that day, I stand by the belief that the vast majority of Americans are dedicated to peaceful discourse and lawful protest. As we look ahead, let's focus on reinforcing the democratic principles that unite us, rather than allowing isolated incidents to tear us apart.
Thank you very much for your participation. That's all for now. We therefore close this first part of the debate and invite you to leave your comments on this channel.
Don't miss the second part of this presidential debate, coming soon on this channel. Thanks for following us, and see you next time.